The Big Five Cannabis. With the legalization of pot just hours away, we kick off our week-long series on what you need to know about the rules, the responsibilities, and the unanswered questions. We'll hear from the federal government, the cities and provinces, law enforcement, the experts, and Canadians from across the country on this fundamental social change. I'm Peter Van Dusen. Starting Wednesday, the almost century-old prohibition on marijuana comes to an end in this country. But what's replacing that prohibition is not a seamless transition to a national set of rules that will apply everywhere. Instead, get ready for a patchwork of regulations and restrictions from province to province on who can smoke weed and where, who can grow it, and how you can buy it. Even some municipalities within the same province will have different rules. It all sets the stage for a little haziness, if you will. There are lots of unanswered questions, so this week we'll try to help you understand what legalized pot will mean for users, for the growers and sellers, for law enforcement and municipalities, for travelers to the U.S., and for healthcare. Tonight, we'll focus on cannabis and the rules. On October 17th, the sale of dried or fresh cannabis, as well as cannabis oil, will be legal in Canada. Adults will be able to possess up to 30 grams of legal cannabis and grow 4 plants in their home for personal use, except in Quebec and Manitoba, where home grow is prohibited. The sale will be strictly regulated by provinces, which can impose their own restrictions on minimum age, personal possession limit, and locations to consume cannabis. Cannabis edible products and concentrates could become legal in about a year from now. Offenders can either be ticketed or face jail time. If someone is in possession of more than 30 grams of cannabis, they could be ticketed or face up to 5 years behind bars. Selling cannabis without a license, on the other hand, can land someone in jail for up to 14 years. For our special series this week on cannabis legalization, we sat down for an extended discussion with the federal government's point person on cannabis, Bill Blair. He's Canada's Minister of Border Security and Organized Crime Reduction. We covered so many of the outstanding questions and concerns about how legalization will unfold in this country, and we'll hear from Bill Blair each night this week on specific areas of concern. We started with the rules and what Canadians need to know. Bill Blair, first off, thanks for giving us a big chunk of your time this week to discuss this important issue for Canadians and on cannabis legalization. And tonight we're going to focus the part of our discussion here on the rules. What are your expectations for legalization? What do you think will change about our society because of the legal presence of recreational pot?
Well, you talk about the rules, which really brings us to regulation, and we're implementing the most comprehensive and what I believe will be far more effective system of regulatory control on every aspect of cannabis, from its production to its distribution and its consumption right across the country. For almost a century, we've had a single paragraph of prohibition, a criminal prohibition. And overwhelmingly, almost half of all Canadians have ignored that law. It's resulted in, a reluctance, I think, on the part of law enforcement and the criminal justice system to effect any kind of change using the criminal sanction, and so we're replacing it with a very comprehensive set of rules. And I think it's important. It's going to take some time, but it's important for Canadians to understand that regulatory system and why it's in place and how it will protect them.
And we're going to talk about a lot of that in our conversation during the course of our coverage this week. What do you expect? You talked about half of Canadians have ignored the prohibition. There's a lot of people wondering, okay, so as soon as now that we have it legalized, suddenly the numbers are going to go through the roof. Everybody's going to turn to cannabis now. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think one of the things that we've been able to do is initiate a national discussion on, lower risk guidelines and what the consequences are, particularly for young people using this drug. I've been working in that criminal prohibition for most of my adult life, and yet it's only in the last 2 years that we've heard a lot of discussion with the medical community about the impact on the developing adolescent brain, where we've now seen coming forward lower risk cannabis use guidelines that we're getting a far better understanding of the risks in impaired driving. It's been an issue since 1925 and against the law in this country, but for the first time, people are now talking about it and thinking about it. There's a lot of public information about the risks and about the consequences. We've increased law enforcement's capacity to detect it. I think those were important conversations.
You talked about how long you've been working on this and the fact you've been dealing in this area for most of your adult life as a police officer. Which part of legalization gives you the most worry?
For me, the most important part of this was reducing the incidence of use among kids. I think right now, we have the highest rates, as I mentioned, but the cannabis the kids are using, they don't know its potency, they don't know where it came from, they don't know its purity. They're associating with criminals to acquire it. And you know, a big motive for me was to stop criminalizing our kids, but to reduce their incidence of use through restriction and through education. And so that's the thing I'll be watching most closely is how this affects our kids. And secondly, you know, we've also
is that the part that gives you the most? Like, of all the rules and regulations you've put in place, what is it you're going to be watching that makes you wonder? I hope this works the way we want it to work.
Well, certainly, I want to see a reduction in use among kids, and that's the combination of both regulation and education. And the second part of that, of course, and it's also important. This is an $8 billion industry for organized crime, and we have said and have set out to displace that illicit market and replace it with a well-regulated legal one. And that'll clearly take time. And there are different models of distribution being adopted in different provinces across the country. You know, some of them I suspect will work better than others. We'll learn from that experience. One of the commitments I think we need to make is we're going to monitor very carefully how this rolls out, and where something is not working, move quickly to make it work. And when we discover something is very effective, make sure that everyone else has that information.
StatsCan has reported only half of the cannabis users say they will buy their weed legally after October 17th. What does that do to your plans to try and cut out the black market if half of the people say they might still be trying to get it from the black market?
You know, I think what people say and what people do may be very different things. And I think once we offer Canadians a legal choice, a choice which is healthier and safer because they know the potency and the purity of what it is they're buying, as long as it's competitive in price and in quality and they have reasonable access to it without having, you know, it's relatively easy to maintain or obtain, I believe most Canadians will eventually move towards the legal market. And at the same time, we've left all the criminal sanctions in place. Law enforcement can still do the job of dealing with illegal production and illegal drug trafficking because those laws and penalties still exist. What we have done in addition, though, is we've given adult consumers a choice, a legitimate choice, a healthier and safer choice.
Okay, let's talk about what's happening in the province of Quebec. There, the age was supposed to be 18. The new premier-elect in Quebec, François Legault, says he's going to bump the legal age up to 21. Prime Minister's expressed concerns that may actually encourage the black market. What's your message for the Premier of Quebec about boosting the age to 21?
First of all, we have worked well with the province of Quebec for the last 2 years in the development of regulation. It's my intention to continue to work with them. I think we all share the same goals of protecting our kids and keeping this out of their hands, and at the same time displacing that illicit market. I know there is a concern because the overwhelming majority of cannabis users in this country are between the ages of 18 and 25. And when a significant cohort of that, up to the age of 21, can't legally obtain it under these new regulations, they'll continue, I suspect, to obtain cannabis from the illicit market. But I think it's something we'll work very closely with, I respect the jurisdiction of the province and the decisions that they made. I have some concerns about what impact that can have on our ability to displace the illicit market.
Right, but in your view, having worked in this area a lot, what you're telling me is that it's not a good idea. They're okay to do it. It's their right to do it.
It is their right to do it. But I will tell you, Peter, the way I looked at it is I think we have an absolute responsibility to protect our kids, and so the regulations reflect that. But for adults, at age of adulthood, then we also want to make sure that adults who choose to make decisions about their own health can do it in an informed way and have safe and healthier choices to make. And so making sure that, a person between the ages of even 18 to 25, there is still a risk with respect to the development of their brain. There are significant health risks depending on how early they start to use it, how frequently they use it, and the potency of what they use. And so we want to make sure that for adults who make this choice, they have enough information to make lower risk choices, and that what they have as to choose from is something of known potency and purity so that they can be safer. We'll continue to work with the province of Quebec, and I believe that we share the same goals, to protect our kids and displace that illicit market. There may be some disagreement on exactly how we reach those ends, but we all intend the same thing.
A couple of quick questions, Dan, here. You won't be looking at legalizing edibles until a year from now. A lot of people think there's benefit, health benefits in edibles versus smoking a product, and a lot of people are wondering why you're doing that. Why aren't edibles legal now too?
Two things. First of all, smoking cannabis is probably the least healthy way to consume it. We understand that, but we also understand the legal complexity and the health complexity of regulating edibles. We've learned in other jurisdictions, both Washington and Colorado, had enormous difficulty in regulating this. They urged caution, and we are exercising that caution.
And yet they're available online now. You can get them illegally.
They're available illegally online.
Why don't you shut it down?
It will be shut down. That's the responsibility of law enforcement. Our responsibility is to develop strict regulations for doing it right. And that work has already begun at Health Canada. We'll be gazetting those regulations and following through in the normal process. We've made a commitment that within 12 months of the implementation of legalized and regulated cannabis, we'll introduce the regulations for edibles.
Okay, but in the meantime, you're saying that online edible sales will be shut down.
They're operating outside of the law, and it's up to law enforcement to enforce the existing laws.
And law enforcement people are saying, look, we're busy with lots of other stuff that isn't this, and that's not our priority right now, is essentially what they're saying.
And I understand their priorities, but that was unlawful yesterday. Today, it'll be unlawful next week, even under the new regulations. The edibles are not allowed until they're regulated, and that's very clearly stated in the legislation. We're moving quickly to get those regulations in place because we know, that a lot of Canadian adult consumers are interested in a healthier way of consuming this substance, but we want to make sure that if they make that choice, it can be done safely. And there is a complexity to regulating edibles, as we're learning as we write those regs.
Bill Blair on the rules. Thank you.
Of course.
I think it already has. It is a test, and it has been a test. I think the fact that they've rushed it through so quickly, there's absolutely nothing in the process of legalizing cannabis that has gone, I think, well. Whether it's First Nations that are opposed to it because they haven't been consulted. Police are not ready for it. Municipalities aren't ready for it. Parents don't know if their kids are going to be able to get pot on mail order. How are all of these things going to be rolled out? I think it's been a failure.
What I don't think is the right thing to do is the fact that we're legalizing a substance at the same time that so many Canadians, particularly marginalized Canadians, we're talking about Indigenous communities, racialized communities, have been criminalized for an activity of personal possession. They're going to continue to face barriers to education, to employment, to volunteer opportunities. All of this is going to continue to impact their lives. At the same time, this activity will now be legal. And that's why I've called for a long time to properly legalize something like cannabis. There should have been immediately a deletion of all records. They should have immediately suspended, or not suspended, they should have immediately deleted all records.
Well, we have some fresh numbers tonight to help inform the conversation about how Canadians feel on the eve of cannabis legalization. And I guess in a word, they feel kind of mellow. David Coletto is the CEO of Abacus Data and a regular contributor to our analysis and understanding of the big issues that face Canadians. He joins me from Toronto. David, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Peter.
You've been getting feedback from across the country on cannabis legalization. First, let's start there. Who you engaged and when?
We surveyed about 3,000 Canadians in September, representative sample conducted online for the Canadian Cannabis Council.
Okay, let's go through the findings. You asked Canadians how they feel about legalization. What are they saying?
Overall, what we find is that the majority of Canadians either support or can accept legalization of cannabis. We find just under a majority, about 46%, say they either strongly support or somewhat support legalization. Another 24% say they can accept it. Opposition runs around 30%, with about a split 12% somewhat opposed and 18% strongly opposed. I think it's interesting that more people strongly favor legalization than strongly oppose it, which I think is a signal to really where public opinion is on this, that while there's opposition, there doesn't seem to be large numbers across the country.
Right. And when you look at age groups, what did you find there?
Well, we find, I don't think surprising to your viewers, is that younger Canadians are typically more supportive of legalizing cannabis than older Canadians. Upwards of 80% of those under the age of 30 favor legalization, but a majority of those, even over the age of 60, can at least accept legalization. So this is an issue that, while there's some age differences, a majority opinion across all age groups.
Right, and we see across the country regional support here. It's favored in every part of the country.
It is higher in the West Coast than, say, in Quebec, but again, a majority opinion viewpoint held in every part of the country.
Let's talk about the politics around the debate. And given what we've heard from the political parties, these results are, I suppose, not a huge surprise. What do you find when you break the support and opposition groups down by voters and party affiliation?
Well, what we often find in a lot of big controversial or big issues is that we find sharp divisions by party. We don't really see that here. While Liberals and Conservatives are split, Liberals more likely to favor legalization than Conservatives, even among Conservative voters, a majority say they either support or can accept legalization. So it does suggest that, you know, perhaps the Conservatives are not going to go after the actual policy move itself. There may not be political opportunities there because support is so broad and crosses partisan lines.
Yeah, and I think what we're hearing is they're going after the way the government's rolled it out, and they're picking on certain parts of the legalization process that they're not happy about. A couple of key factors that I think drive opinions on this issue: how people feel about cannabis, and of course the social impact of legalization and their comfort level with how the government is bringing it in. So let's talk about that. How do Canadians feel about the way the federal government is regulating legal cannabis?
Well, so far, and again, it's so far, it takes effect on Wednesday, I think people generally feel okay about the legal framework that both Health Canada and the Government of Canada have put in place. 70% say either that they think the process is going very well or well enough. And given, I think, the uncertainty about this issue, it's a new policy area, that's not a bad place for the government to be. You're not going to have lots of people cheerleading or thinking that things are going great because we don't know yet what the impact's going to be. But on the flip side, there doesn't seem to be a lot of nervousness about the system as it's designed. So now it's just a matter of wait and see to see how it works.
Let's drill down a bit on attitudes, because we hear this a lot. We hear people talk about cannabis versus alcohol or comparing the two. In your survey, how do Canadians compare cannabis to alcohol? What do they say about those choices?
Well, most people, you know, either think that it's a better choice actually than alcohol or an equivalent choice. And I think this is a really important data point to follow over the next few months, because if you believe that, you know, as 49% of Canadians do, that there's really no difference between alcohol and cannabis as a product, then you're not going to be predisposed to opposing legalizing it. In the same way that if you think it's actually a better choice than alcohol, then you're certainly not going to. And we see a strong correlation between supporting legalization and your answers to these questions. And so it's something to watch, I think, as we go forward with this policy change.
All right, let's get to the usage question. Of the people you surveyed, what do they say about their own cannabis consumption or the consumption of people around them?
Well, in our survey, half of Canadians that we surveyed said they have at least tried cannabis once. About 20% are using it at least occasionally, and about 10% say they use it regularly. They're admitting it to us at least, that they're using it regularly. And what's interesting is there's, again, a strong relationship between proximity to this product and your support for legalization. If we go to the next board that also looks at, you know, do you know Canadians? Do you know people who use this product? Similarly, about 70% of Canadians know at least one or two people who use cannabis monthly. And again, they are more likely to favor legalization. So it's a question really of how comfortable we are with this product, how often we see other people or ourselves are using it. And what I've learned from other research that we've done is that most people know that people are using this. Most people know that you know, it's fairly easy to access now while it's illegal, and that simply legalizing it is going to bring it out of the shadows and make it a safer product and more controlled for young people and for those who actually want to use it.
Okay, let's finish on a policy area that the federal government has yet to figure out fully, and that's cannabis edibles. Government says it'll deal with this in the coming year. How ready are Canadians for cannabis edibles and beverages?
Well, I think this is, you know, perhaps surprising given the rhetoric, but, you know, most Canadians say they're comfortable enough with the idea of edibles and beverages being sold in licensed retail stores. So, you know, it's a little lower than the overall, you know, comfort level with legalization, but it's still a majority opinion. And so, you know, we'll see again as legalization happens on Wednesday and as people evaluate what the impact of legalization is going to have. We may see these numbers change, but I think this is a good starting point. If you are, for example, a licensed producer of cannabis, and you're looking to get into the edibles market, the public's already kind of ready for seeing these kind of products available.
All right, so the bottom line is?
Bottom line is, I think Canadians are ready. Many of them are in a wait-and-see mode, but doesn't appear to be staunch, significant opposition to legalization at this point. And now it's time to see what impact legalization actually has.
All right. Always good information to help drive the debate, help us understand the debate in this country. David Coletto from Abacus Data, thanks again.
Thanks, Peter.
I I think it depends on the generation, really, that you grew up in. Like, I'm 22, going on 23, so for someone like me, it doesn't really surprise me. It doesn't really feel like much is going to change.
Nothing would happen, in my opinion. Who cares anyway?
I never understood this decision. I think this will encourage the youth to consume some marijuana. But I also think that illegal trade is not good as well.
Maybe for the better, maybe not. I mean, everyone smokes it anyway to begin with.
Honestly, I think it'll make the streets safer because it'll be like more controlled. So when people know that they're getting it from like a dispensary, then it's not going to be laced with something, because that's been a problem.
I think in some ways it'll change Canada for the better. I think people who need access to it for medicinal reasons, I think that's a really positive step, very forward thinking.
Well, as we've mentioned, there's a real patchwork of rules for legal cannabis across Canada. They differ from province to province and from municipality to municipality. Where and how to buy the product, home cultivation, smoking or not in public, and a lot more. How are the municipalities preparing? Are they ready? From Saskatoon, I'm joined by Charlie Clark, the mayor of that city, and from Magog, Quebec, by Vicky Mayhem, the mayor of Magog, and the president of the Canadian Federation of Canadian Municipalities. Good to see you both. Thanks to both of you for taking time to speak with me today. And Mayor Ham, let me start with you. How prepared are Canadian municipalities for cannabis legalization?
Well, I believe they're well prepared, actually, because we've been working on the subject for a while now, and the Federation did publish a guide to help the municipalities work through this. Because, you know, what we've been hearing, we've been hearing a lot about the police departments, but a few people have mentioned all the departments that it can affect in a municipality, and it can affect up to 17 different departments. So it's very important to get prepared, and we've been doing our work very well. We're getting ready. The only thing is, so far, there's only 2 provinces that have agreed to share the excise, the tax from the cannabis, and that was, the Prime Minister was pretty clear on that, was supposed to go help municipalities. We shouldn't have to cover the cost for this. It's not our decision, right?
Right. Is that the biggest of the unresolved issues? Are there others?
Oh, there's others. We've heard a lot about the training for the police force and equipment and all that. But we're very preoccupied about this issue because we're hearing provinces saying that maybe they might not transfer this money to the municipalities, and it was very clear that it was supposed to go to municipalities. And we're also starting to hear some provinces saying, well, maybe municipalities should be able to prove us the expenses they have with the legalization, and that I think the FCM has done. They've worked very hard, as if they've documented it. They've given the proof to the federal government and the provincial governments that, you know, the decision is made in Ottawa, but it happens in our communities. Okay. So we have the cost. All
right, Charlie Clark, let me ask you: is Saskatoon ready for legalized cannabis? And if you are, how do you know you are? What have you done?
Well, I think we're as ready as we can be at this stage. You know, we've done a lot of work and held community meetings, had discussions about where retail locations can be located. That I think involves conversations about how close to schools, you know, where are people comfortable. You have to work through those issues in the community. We've done that. We've established our rules around licensing fees and all those types of things, as well as production facilities where they can be located. That said, there are unknowns, and there are some ongoing issues that we won't know, I think, until legalization occurs and it rolls out into our communities. But I would say across the country, municipalities have said, we're going to take this on. We realize this is going to be a change, and have done our work on our end to be as ready as we can be. Okay, so what are the things you're watching for? I mean, you say you're as ready as you can be, but there are still, it sounds like, going to be some bumps in the road. Where will the bumps be? Well, you know, one of them that's coming up a lot is we have now got a lot of apartments and condominiums that are saying that they're not going to allow the smoking of marijuana, of cannabis, in their facilities. And given that in our province it is considered that you cannot smoke anywhere in a public place, it's a controlled substance just like alcohol. That, I think, is going to lead to some issues where, even though it's legal, if you live in an apartment or condo, you're very limited as to where you can smoke or consume cannabis. And so these are issues that I think we're going to have to sort out as this unfolds, because it's, again, as Mayor Ham said, decisions made in Ottawa land at the feet of mayors and local communities, and we're the ones that have to figure out how to manage through these kinds of issues.
Mayor Ham, one of those big issues, Mayor Clark's talked about it. Where will people be allowed to smoke marijuana? Different rules in different cities. What's the rule in Magog in your city? And in your conversations with other mayors and other municipalities, what are they considering when they make these rules about where people can smoke or where they can't?
Yeah, well, the situation in Magog is pretty much the same as what you just heard in Saskatoon, and we are seeing those issues coming up with people that are renting, that have leases, and some people are starting to talk. Well, maybe we should have some dedicated places where you can smoke cannabis. Of course, we're talking about the inconvenience for other people of smoking cannabis, but there's other ways of consuming cannabis that might not be that harmful. So I think we will adjust. The federal government did say, in 6 months we'll be discussing, and there will be some adjustments that have to be made. And it's different from one city from municipality to another, because I've heard this a lot. When you're in a small rural community and you don't have urban spaces and sidewalks and parks, maybe the issue in public spaces is not the same. So it is different, and it's normal that it's different because our municipalities don't have the same challenges.
All right, Mayor Clark, how ready is Saskatoon to deal with the potential for an increase, possibly, in drug-impaired driving? Are you ready for that?
That was one of the other issues I would say has some uncertainty to it. The drug detecting technology that exists now is not perfect, and it's getting people to take blood tests is challenging. I understand the federal government has approved one a type of device that can test for marijuana impaired driving, but it's not proving to be as perfect a tool as can be. And so I would say this is another area. We've got a lot of officers going off for training and developing the ability to make sure that they can manage this successfully, but that costs money and resources to our police services and covering police officers while they're away. And I think that it's more difficult than detecting alcohol to detect impairment through cannabis and THC, and I think this is going to be another challenge as we unfold from here.
Mayor Hammond, talk to me about that, about the challenges for municipalities in general, and concerns perhaps municipalities have about road safety with the legalization of cannabis.
Yeah, well, we just went into consultation for our zoning here, and we've heard it also, the preoccupation of our police department. Will they be ready, and how many police officers will be well trained, and do they have the proper equipment? And then again, I have to say, we'll have to adjust. We'll see how this goes down the road. But it does affect other departments in the city, and we've discussed that also. Even our human resource department, we have to make sure that our policies inside our organization are adapted to this new legalization.
Okay, Mayor Clark, as I understand it, the City of Saskatoon will be charging, I think it's $20,000 licensing fee for retail cannabis outlets and production facilities, and a $10,000 renewal fee. Is that so? And why did you decide on that for a licensing fee when I think normal businesses only pay $125 for their initial license? Why the change?
Yeah, it was a hotly debated discussion. I mean, basically, we've got a signal from our provincial government at this stage that they're not looking at the excise tax fee revenue that's being generated going back to municipalities. We have said in our community we don't think that the municipal taxes should be covering the cost of this, and there are additional costs related to this new industry coming on board in our community. We're going to have 7 shops, 7 retail outlets that we know that have been given licenses to operate here, and that this is a mechanism to help to cover some of those costs. It was very hotly debated at council, and a divided vote as to whether that was the appropriate mechanism, but that was what our council decided, and there is a sense that there will be quite a bit of revenue generated because it's a limited number of licenses that are going to be put out there, and actually in the industry there was not much pushback to this approach to licensing. But it's like anything else. It's a new initiative. This is how we are rolling it out, and I'm sure it'll be further debated as time goes on.
All right, it does sort of circle us back, Mayor Ham, to the whole idea of funding from the provinces and cost sharing with municipalities, and Mayor Clark's alluded to that. How is this going to be resolved if some provinces are not willing to share revenues with municipalities? Would you like the federal government to step in? Perhaps the federal government could set a framework that says, look, you only get this 75% from the federal government if you're prepared to share a chunk of that with municipalities.
Yeah, they might have to, definitely. Our job is to remind that was the goal, and that the Prime Minister said it himself when he transferred the money to the provinces. And we've been working with the Association of all the provinces and territories to try to work this out. I did hear that there should be an announcement maybe today, I think, in Alberta. So we're going to start working. We've been working that way, and if we have to, we'll have to go sit back with the federal government and see what they can do to make sure that it's a clear command that this has to go help municipalities with their costs. Because I totally agree with the Mayor of Saskatoon. We should not have to assume the cost of this.
Okay, quickly to each of you to finish up here. How do you think your municipalities will change, if they will change, with legalization? Now, Mayor Clark, let me start with you.
You know, my view is I don't think this will create any massive difficulties or challenges. I think alcohol is already a substance that causes impairment and is out there in the community and widely available in retail outlets, and so there are already a number of people consuming on the black market, and we'll see how many more do. But I do think we're prepared, and we have worked hard. We know we want to keep our community safe, and we want to have clear rules that are clearly regulated. And while there are some of these uncertainties, I believe we will be able to manage through them.
All right, Mayor Ham, final word to you.
Well, once again, we totally agree. I don't think it'll be that much of an impact, on top of which we haven't even been approached to have a place for selling cannabis yet in our municipality. So it's important to get ready, and everything we're doing has to be done, but I don't think it will have that much of an impact. I totally agree.
All right. Thank you both for your time and the view from Saskatoon and Magog, and the wider view on behalf of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. Good to speak to both of you, and maybe we'll check in a few months and see how things are going.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Where else are you going to have it? I mean, besides home, you're going to want to be walking down the road on a sunny day, having a joint, or in the park. So I believe you should have it in public, absolutely.
I feel there's going to have to be a happy medium, like smoking in public, but designated smoking spots.
Absolutely not. I'm very strong on that. I'm not happy about this whole legalization of marijuana thing. And if people can't smoke regular cigarettes in public because of the secondhand smoke, why should we be subjected to marijuana smoke?
Maybe designated public places, not just anywhere they want. Same as smoking, it's impolite to smoke in front of people and blow your smoke in their faces, I guess.
I think it should be regulated the same way as tobacco is, and yeah, kept out the hands of minors and items like that.
I'd have to say no on that, even in designated smoking areas. And I'm very pro marijuana, cannabis. I mean, all my life I thought it should have been legalized. But taking it outside in public like that, no, because it's an intoxicant.
Well, my next guest is a cannabis legal expert. She's Trina Fraser, a lawyer and co-partner with the firm of Brazo Seller, and she joins me now in our studio. Good to see you.
Thank you.
First of all, is that a sign of the times now, a cannabis lawyer? Is that the next big practice area we're going to see in this country as we move ahead with legalization?
I think so. I think for a few years, I called myself a business lawyer, regulatory lawyer, focusing in cannabis, and then I just decided to call myself a cannabis lawyer. It was easier.
Let's start, because I think people are going to hear more about this. So what does that actually mean in terms of practice and so on? How do you become why are you a cannabis lawyer?
Well, it's an industry that's very highly regulated, so I do help my clients with throughout the application process and getting licensed, and then also with compliance issues on an ongoing basis, and with general corporate commercial legal matters that come up in the course of operations.
Okay, let me start with some basics here in terms of before we get into some of the rules that people want to consider as legalization takes hold. Let's start with the numbers of people using cannabis. We've seen some numbers from Stats Can that it's 4 million Canadians are regular consumers, so that's at least once in a 3-month period. Do you accept those numbers? Do you think that's right?
Well, I think I have a healthy dose of skepticism when it comes to self-reporting of illegal activity. So I think it might be a little bit underreported at this point.
We might see those numbers spike with legalization taking hold, and then there'll be no, well, I'm not sure the stigma disappears. Will people still be reluctant to say, yeah, I'm a pot smoker?
It'll take some time, but I think that's an evolution that is already happening, and it's going to continue to happen. I know the government says the intent of legalization is not to normalize cannabis use, but that will be the inevitable result of legalization.
As much as the Minister of Border Security and whose job it is to lead the government rollout on this, Bill Blair has been telling us, they expect an orderly transition. There'll be some growing pains and so on. What do you think the transition will be like?
Well, I know law enforcement is a little bit concerned because of impairment issues, testing. In Ontario, we still are a little bit in flux about public consumption rules, and so I understand that. But for the average person in Canada, I think next Wednesday will come and go without them really noticing anything at all, other than a lot of news stories. But I really don't think it's going to change people's lives that much.
How come?
Because I don't think there's going to be, people are just going to start suddenly smoking up and driving. I don't think suddenly, you're going to walk down the street and every second person that you pass is going to be smoking a joint. I just don't think it's really going to change people's consumption patterns that much.
We have a real patchwork of rules and regulations and distribution, legal ages from province to province, even from municipality to municipality across the country. Did it have to be this way?
Well, it really did because of federalism. We have a division of powers in the country, and while the production of cannabis is dealt with at the federal level, the distribution and sale and consumption rules are really deemed to be within the power and the jurisdiction of the provinces, and that's why we see those matters handled at the provincial level, and then the provinces then to varying degrees have also enabled municipalities to pass specific bylaws dealing with some of these issues as well.
Let's drill down on some of these if we can. I mean, where will people be allowed to smoke up? Let's say they want to smoke cannabis, they want to smoke marijuana, they want pot, or where will they be allowed to do it?
Well, it'll literally depend on what municipality you are in, because the approach is dealt with provincially. So each province takes, basically you can divide it into 2 categories. Either it's treated the way tobacco is treated, so there are certain restricted public areas where you can't, but other than that you can consume. And then there's outright bans on public consumption. So from province to province that's the case. So for the provinces that have a more permissive approach that's akin to tobacco smoking, then you have to look at municipal bylaws, because municipalities would have the ability for the most part to create more restrictive bylaws about where you can consume cannabis. So it really depends exactly where you are located at the time.
Okay, what about in your own home, for instance? If you can condo boards, can landlords stop you from what will become a legal practice from smoking marijuana in your home or on your property? If will they have that power?
So they will, and the powers will vary a little bit depending again on what province you're in. So if you own your home and it's a freehold property, there's certainly no restriction on you from smoking or vaping or eating edible cannabis within your home. If you are a renter, if you are a condo unit or strata holder, then you do have to look more closely, because in Ontario, for example, there's certainly an ability of landlords to impose smoking and vaping bans in leases, and there's also an ability of condo boards to pass bylaws which protect the the safety of the property and its unit holders, and also the reasonable enjoyment of the property and the units by the unit holders. So those kind of powers can be used to create smoking and vaping restrictions and prohibitions.
We're hearing a lot about supply. Will there be enough supply in your view?
Well, we don't really.
And what does it mean, I guess, if there isn't enough supply?
Well, we may have some limited product. Well, we certainly have limited product types available initially, because we can only sell dried cannabis and cannabis oil with limited THC concentration to start. We know that for a fact, and it'll be up to a year before we see edibles and concentrates as part of the legal framework. Right. But even within the restricted product types that we have now, there's certainly an anticipation that there will be a shortage initially. The demand that's being anticipated by the provincial distributors, they're not able to get enough supply to meet that initial anticipated demand. So, we have to see how consumers actually react to these products being for sale legally. We don't know yet how they're going to assess product quality, the convenience of how they have to purchase it, the pricing levels, the availability of different product types. And so if the demand is what we think it's going to be, we anticipate an initial shortage.
Okay. How difficult is it to obtain a license in this country, or a permit to sell to Canadians?
So for a selling license, if it's for medical purposes, that's federal. So I'll leave that aside for a moment. If for recreational purposes, then it's a provincial matter. And again, how you get a license is a province by province, approach. In Ontario, we don't even know what that process is really going to look like yet. Right. Those applications are only going to open in December. So, I mean, it is a process, and it usually typically involves both the provincial and municipal levels of government and certain approvals and steps you have to go through at both levels to open that store. One of the stated objectives, of course, of legalization is to try and shut down the black market in the sale of cannabis. How realistic is that objective? We're never going to get rid of it completely. I think really what the intention should be is to try to take a significant chunk out of the black market. And if we do a good job at striking the right balance between public health and safety and reduction of the illicit market, then we'll get there. But if we over-regulate in the name of public health and safety, and keeping it out of the hands of kids, and we go too far, the problem is we're not going to create an industry that's competitive with the black market. So it's trying to find that right balance to get the ultimate achievement at the end of the day that's going to be the challenge. And one of the big selling points seems to be it's the product safety argument, that because of regulation and because of legalization. Why choose legal over black market? So for the average consumer, I mean, first of all, you're not going to face the potential of criminal or regulatory prosecution. I think that's an important one that will be important for people. But the product, the quality assurance that's gone into that product, the testing, the restricted pesticide use, the very highly controlled environment in which the product is cultivated and processed is also going to be important, and also accurate labeling. So I think it's often been shown that sometimes what you're buying on the black market may not be exactly what it's represented to be as far as the cannabinoid content, and so those are also going to be tested and displayed on the packaging so that you can expect and control the experience that you're going to have when you consume cannabis. Big debate in this country still about what happens with medical marijuana dispensaries and whether they shut down to try and become part of the legal process. Some are saying, look, we don't think the legal process is going to work. The online stuff isn't going to work, so we have clients. We're going to stay doing what we're doing. What do you see happening there? Again, depends on the province, because BC, for example, has taken a bit of a more forgiving and permissive approach to dispensaries and have basically said as long as you've applied for a license and you're going through the licensing process, you can essentially stay open for business. Ontario, on the other hand, has said if you don't close your doors by October 17th, you will never get a provincial license to sell cannabis in this province. So, and there are varying approaches in between that too. So, what they do will depend on where they are, what they perceive the risk of enforcement action to be. But overall, I think in the longer term, we can expect enforcement action to ramp up against illegal retailers, and for the most part, they will go by the wayside eventually. All right. Trina Fraser, thanks so much for coming to talk about the rules around cannabis and what to watch for. Good to talk to you. Thank you. And Tuesday on the Big Five Cannabis series, we'll take a closer look at the business of cannabis, the growers and sellers, and the rules for marketing and advertising. Another big story we are following is the fate of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Media reports suggest Saudi Arabia is set to admit Khashoggi died during an interrogation gone wrong at the Saudi consulate in Turkey. Canada has joined other members of the international community in demanding answers concerning the disappearance and suspected assassination of the Saudi journalist and Washington Post columnist who disappeared almost 2 weeks ago. Today, Prime Minister Trudeau and Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland had this to say about the incident.
We, as I've expressed a number of times, are real concern on the reports coming out in the situation of this journalist. We're very much working with our allies in the international community to try and bring forward a concerted, or at least an aligned response as we learn more about the situation. It's still early days, and you don't want to make a mistake on this, but obviously this is something that has highlighted real concerns for an awful lot of people, and let's just say I'm glad that we're having these conversations in the open now.
This is a very serious situation, which Canada takes seriously. That's why I spoke today with the Foreign Minister of Saudi Arabia. We are working in close collaboration with our allies. I've spoken about this issue with the Secretary of State of the United States, with the Foreign Minister of Germany. I'm in close touch with Jeremy Hunt, the Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom. And let me also say, Canada and our government has a strong record of standing up for human rights around the world, very much including in Saudi Arabia. We're going to continue to do that. It's important to establish clear facts about what has happened, and it's important for the international community to be clear that those facts need to be established in a clear and transparent manner. This is an important issue.
All right, let's bring in three colleagues now from the Parliamentary Press Gallery to talk about what's making news today. Joël Denis Bellavance is the Parliamentary Bureau Chief for La Presse. Althea Raj is the Parliamentary Bureau Chief here in Ottawa for HuffPost Canada, and John Ivison is the Parliamentary Bureau Chief for Post Media and a columnist with the National Post. So let's talk about Jamal Khashoggi in a fast-moving story. Developments keep changing, but it now reports suggest that the Saudis may have maybe prepared to say he died in custody during an interrogation process at the consulate in Turkey. Now the focus will be, we've heard Chrystia Freeland talk about this case, and now the focus may be more on what Canada does now. If it's clear there's a direct link between torture tactics and the death of Jamal Khashoggi. Joël Denis, let me start with you. What should we watch for?
Well, whether the Canadian government is ready to restart or put the relationship between Canada and Riyadh on a new basis. Remember, there's been some tensions between Canada and Saudi Arabia over the tweet that the Foreign Affairs Minister put out about respecting human rights. And Canada had some difficult times with Saudi Arabia, although Canada sold some military equipment to that country. So I guess it will bring it to a new focus, whether we should put more emphasis on human rights and not on military sales to that country. And that, I guess that's going to be the focus of the relationship right now, more on human rights and less on equipment to be sold.
Althea, is there a big challenge here for the government and a prime minister who's made, if I can put it this way in broad terms, the treatment of people around the world when he talks about trade deals and rights and so on, he's put that at the forefront of his government. What does he have to do now, or what's the challenge facing?
I think there's more pressure because of this case. I think it's one thing when you're talking about, sadly, Yemeni people being starved and beaten, and when you're even talking about Saudi themselves and whether or not the regime was using weaponized labs, basically what we're selling to them against their own citizen. But when you have the idea that this is a permanent resident of a Western country, a reporter, a columnist for the Washington Post, going into an embassy and being possibly tortured to death, and then trying to hide it, then that puts Minister Freeland's words, what she said in the House today, that this is a feminist, humanitarian government, that those are the benchmarks of its foreign policy, then you are kind of tested to find out if your words actually mean something. So I think they're probably going to keep going with the armored vehicle purchase, because they've basically pegged it on the Conservatives. Oh, the Conservatives did it, so we're not going to get involved in that. But I think going forward, I think they've already kind of boxed themselves in some ways on Riyadh, and I think that will continue.
What do you think, John?
Well, I think this regime in Saudi Arabia has now gone so rogue on so many fronts. I mean, the Yemen thing, they were talking about it being the greatest famine in a century, if unless the Saudis stop bombing. And there's no signs they're going to stop bombing. Clearly, that is a much greater tragedy than even the murder of this journalist. So I think at some point the government is going to have to walk the talk. I mean, this is we've already to some extent done that. In the previous case, we fell out over in the summer, but you know, for them to admit that they've actually tortured this guy to death, that's beyond the pale.
There's kind of a sequential, I suppose. I mean, you know, so Canada tweeted about human rights, Christopher Freeland, in the summer, and that drew the ire of the Saudis, and they pulled medical students out of Canada.
And I think in that case it was slightly different because the end result of that tweet was that it made Canadians feel better about themselves, but I don't think it helped the freedom of the women we were trying to help.
Right.
But this is a different case, and this requires some more.
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say
response.
is that having tweeted about that case, and given the circumstances of what seemed to have happened in this case now, is Canada compelled to do something more and more beyond social media?
I think so, yes. But I think Canada will be watching first and foremost what the United States will do. The United States sells a lot of equipment to Saudi Arabia. It's a key ally of the United States in that region. And if the United States wants to sort of not, you know, push people aside, push people around on this file, Canada will have to probably be more forceful in denouncing this action. But I think the one country that will determine how Western countries react to this will be the United States, I think, more so than anything else because of the kind of relationship that country has. And I think if Saudi Arabia was brought to the confessional, if I may say, le confessionnal, to admit that they had done something wrong, was because Donald Trump pushed them around a bit. So that's going to be interesting to follow.
Let me, if I can, move to trade. Let's move to trade. Andrew Scheer's saying that we have more questions in the House today about how Canada got played by the Americans in this new NAFTA or USMCA, YMCA Village People. No, how, you know. So Andrew Scheer's saying I would have done a better deal, but is he really saying anything new? I mean, I would have done a better deal, and went on to say, because I wouldn't have boxed myself in the way the Liberals did, I would have had something different at the table. What's happened here?
Well, I think everybody says they would have negotiated a better trade deal. I mean, we heard the Liberals say that. We heard Chrétien say that about free trade deals in the 90s. That's not surprising. I think what they're coming to the table with, though, is a little bit surprising. We heard Candace Bergen today say, well, we negotiate better deals, therefore we would have negotiated a better deal. In the House of Commons, we heard Andrew Scheer talk about milk. I mean, we know that he's basically the leader of the Conservative Party because he managed to sign up a bunch of dairy farmers in Quebec, and supply management is very important to him, not just the party, but to him personally. So that's not a surprise. But to argue things like, well, the government did not allow farmers in Canada to ship skim milk products to China so they can have cheaper milk formula for babies. I don't know that supply management was really created for that purpose. So I don't know that many people will care about that. But there are arguments like, well, you should have gotten steel and aluminum tariffs lifted. I think that will ring true for a number of people. Otherwise, we'd have no way of really knowing what the Conservatives have done a better job. I don't know.
Although it's become, this is a narrative. A narrative is, I guess we'll never know, but the narrative is that the narrative is we would have.
That's why they can say it.
Yeah.
Unlike saying,
but they think they've got a winning.
Unlike you saying steel and aluminum.
Yeah.
But I think the steel and aluminum argument is pertinent because the government has agreed to a bunch of quotas and a bunch of caps in a range of areas, including on autos. Yeah. Although the cap on autos is quite far above where we're currently producing. The cap on dairy is much lower, and the one that the Americans wanted on steel was much lower than the current level of production, which is why we didn't sign it. So I think kudos to the government that we didn't agree to the Americans' demand on that. But the idea that we've agreed to the precedent of caps, quotas essentially in a range of areas is worrying to the future investment in Canada. And the fact is we've now been, as somebody put it the other day, deputized as America's partner in the war on globalism and essentially lined up against China.
Right.
On Thursday, we started imposing 25% tariffs on steel coming in from overseas, as the Americans have done. So we are now kind of aligned with them in a way that I don't think this government particularly foresaw when it signed the deal.
We had a Team Canada approach, if I may say, during the whole period of when Canada was negotiating with the United States. That Team Canada approach is gone. We've seen the Tories now more freely criticize the government's handling of this file, and other provinces now. Doug Ford is criticizing the way the government of the deal that they signed, whereas he was all in last week. So I guess this is politics now that we are approaching towards a federal election. The gloves are off, and the Conservative Party will try to attract people who are not happy with that deal.
You know, the government, it's fair game. I mean, the government is saying we've won a victory here. Right. And I think that's politics too, because I don't think it's particularly a victory unless you say victory is not abject defeat.
Well, today the Prime Minister was speaking in Toronto, and he said, well, it's a victory in the sense that it's a victory compared to 2 years ago. And that may be actually accurate.
That's not what he said on the day the thing was signed. So.
Okay, let's finish up on this. Let's finish up on cannabis legalization. We're talking about a lot in our program tonight. It's coming. What are you watching for?
Well, it's a long-term project for the government trying to dislodge the organized crime from this market, trying to bring it to a legal position. And how long will it take before that happens? And will there be any problems that arise on the horizon as we move along on the legalization? Police are very nervous about this. They are probably going to start to put up some roadblocks after this Wednesday when it's become legal to try to catch possibly people driving under the influence of cannabis. So this is a new phenomena. It has changed the society, and now we're waiting for the consequences of that new change.
What do you think, Althea? A big change coming to Canadian society, or not so much?
You know, I think it's not going to be as much as people suspect. I think there will be chaos in terms of implementation because it's not uniform across the boards, and different municipalities get to choose different systems, and different provinces have different rules. So it's not going to be smooth, for sure. And it wouldn't have been smooth even if it was uniform. But I don't know that it's going to be this total chaotic shock that everybody thinks it is.
Reefer madness from the 30s. Like
no, and I think the government's really trying hard to calm people out. Like today, the Canadian Police Association came out and said, we are ready. And it looked like the Conservatives didn't get the memo because in question period, they were like, the police are not ready. And I think Mr. Blair was so thrilled to be able to stand up and say, well, the police have said, and I quote, we are ready.
John, what do you think?
Well, I think obviously the impaired driving thing is a work in progress. But it'll probably resolve itself. You know, I mean, I think that the pricing is going to be key. Yeah. You know, that if the price is, because we've now, some provinces have put big retail outlet chains with unionized employees, it's going to be hard for them to keep their prices below what people are buying on the black market in that case. And if it's not below the price in the black market, then people will still buy it from the black market, in which case the whole exercise was null and void.
And quickly, the black market has started to adjust to the upcoming legalization by dropping the price of their merchandise.
As you would expect the black market to do.
The black market is
all good black market businessmen would do. What are they charging? Let's charge less. Exactly. We'll watch it. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
That's all for another edition of Primetime Politics here on CPAC, the Cable Public Affairs channel. I'm Peter Van Dusen. Thanks for watching.